The LA Gladiators find themselves in grave danger. Their Overwatch League campaign has very quickly spiraled out of control, and now their future is more uncertain than it ever has. Recent struggles have jeopardized their credibility and chances of making the 2023 play-ins, let alone the playoffs. A once esteemed franchise finds themselves at the bottom of the power rankings, and there may not be any hope left for them. Considering the talent they're working with and the season they started, this has been quite the fall from grace, which begs the question, what is wrong with the LA Gladiators? How the series tends to work is we'll look at all of the various issues that they're dealing with in the present, all the things that may have led to these problems to begin with, and any potential solutions that could maybe help this team before it's too late. Where I tend to start these videos is by doing an overview of where a team currently sits, specifically where they are in the standings and why things look pretty ugly for them. And specifically with the Gladiators, since we're at this point in the season and they have playoff hopes on the line, we'll talk a bit about their play-in situation and why they're in such a big danger zone and what's going to need to happen in the coming weeks if they want to narrowly avoid disaster. So as of right now, the LA Gladiators are currently 11th place in the Western Conference with a 5-7 record and a -9 map differential. These stats in comparison to a lot of other teams ahead of them are not very promising, and now they're in serious danger of not just missing the playoffs, but also the play-ins for the first time in franchise history. Leading into this upcoming week, they're on a 6-game losing streak when you include the midseason madness knockouts, and things are getting progressively worse as the weeks go by. The Glads were 1 map away from Korea. They were one of the last teams that you'd have to be concerned about heading into the break, especially when it comes to missing the play-in cutoff, but now, here we are with a boatload of changes, a losing streak, and their season now being in serious jeopardy. The Glads have gone from dark horse underdogs capable of topping the mayhem to quite possibly the worst team in their region in the span of a month. They've won a grand total of 2 maps since the start of the summer stage, and both of those came against the Valiant, who, mind you, they got reverse swept by. Had they at least put up a fight in some of these recent Ls, there would be a chance that they could limp into the play-ins with a winless stage. It wouldn't even matter. If another team just played even worse down the final stretch, they'd be good. But the blowouts as of late have absolutely killed them. From +1 to -9 in just a couple of games. The Glads find themselves in a major hole with a difficult schedule and a lot of in-game problems that don't seem to be getting any better. In a lot of aspects, it's starting to feel kind of hopeless, and at this point, given the circumstances, with them and their opposition, it really might end up taking a miracle. The way they're playing wasn't even good enough to beat the Valiant, and their last 4 opponents are the Boston Uprising, Houston Outlaws, and alexyOWL twice. Do you really think what they've shown us the last couple of weeks is good enough to beat any of those guys? You sure as hell aren't going to be beating Boston or Houston, I think that's pretty certain, and that basically means that your season is coming down to beating alexyOWL and likely a little luck. To give the Gladiators fans some kind of positive note though, if you were to win both of your New York games, let's say, you'd technically be in control of your own destiny. 7 wins feels like the magic number. There's a good chance that somebody else in front of you in that 5-win department may not even get more than 1 victory the rest of the way. All these other 5-win teams don't exactly have easy schedules, so if the Glads somehow took care of business, then they just might luck out. I mean, honestly, even just 1 win might be enough if they're at least competitive in all their losses. But at that point, your destiny is definitely not up to you, and you're basically preying on somebody else's downfall. Ideally, you'd want to win both New York games, or somehow just 2 of your next 4 for the best chance. Again though, keep in mind, this is absolute best case scenario, because with what they've shown us as of late, they are easily bottom tier in their current form. And while alexyOWL aren't untouchable, they sure as hell look a lot more competent than the Gladiators. alexyOWL have been relatively consistent, and their solid fight against Florida the other week shows that they're only getting stronger. If the Gladiators don't want to get absolutely crushed, we need to see a completely different team. Now let's talk about why we're here. What really is wrong with the Gladiators? How did we go from beating Florida to this? Well, It starts with the 2023 offseason. Problem number one has been their inability to recover from their offseason losses. As their title window began to close, they watched in horror as both Reiner and Shu stepped away. And as we all know, these are core position struggles that the Gladiators are still feeling to this day. It's like their biggest offseason departures were a foreshadowing of what's to come. Now, in all fairness, on paper they did a decent job with compensating. Kai and Yaki were still seen as good DPS options, and Lastro, he's a well-rounded support. You have Babel, who has good potential, and Danteh, who's just a high IQ vet and a good leader. However, problem number one has recently reared its ugly head. The lack of those superstars is something that has been difficult to cope with. Sometimes moves don't work out how you think. That's just the nature of team sports. And that's arguably the biggest thing that's really wrong with the Glads. They're victims of a brutal free agent period. We're going to talk about the glaring positional issues in a few moments, but nobody can deny that a lot of their initial signings have not panned out. There's been a lot of criticism for some of the other things going on, but when looking at what they were already working with, Kai and Yaki in recent weeks have not gotten the job done. They just seem kind of average when it comes to playmaking, and on a team with way less firepower compared to even just last year, that's a recipe for disaster. Kevster at a lot of moments has been fending for himself out there. The Glad's way of creating openings is super one-dimensional, especially in the summer stage. It wasn't quite as bad in the spring stage, but you could always feel it. Sometimes Yaki and Kai have completely disappeared from matches, and that has become far more problematic in the present. And there's a lot of variables that go into these struggles. It's not just that they're washed, it goes beyond that. And I think it starts with the fact that Yaki's best hero is Tracer, and ideally that's what Kevster needs to carry on. You can't really have both in that scenario. The things that you primarily play with Yaki just aren't that good in the current meta outside of the Tracer. He's fine on Echo, and he's like a decent Mei, but he can't play those things all the time. And this sadly goes double for Kai. He's a hit scan and a sniper guy, and the way the meta has unfolded has just not been very kind to him. He's very map specific right now, and that just means there's not a lot of reps for him, and the comfort isn't great, and all that leads to some pretty nasty cold streaks. But also, yes, to a certain extent, you could say they are washed. I think that is a pretty harsh word. I think it's more that they're not in their primes anymore, but Kai and Yaki have been in the league since 2020. I think that is pretty big to note. That is a very long shelf life for any pro player. Not many people can play at an extreme level for that long of a time. It's very natural to see regression, along with other players in this league just coming up or even more talented in a very top-heavy league. All this stuff combined just leads to a very inconvenient problem. And that's not even where it ends with your struggles. This is going to extend into support and tank too. Danteh as a solo tank was always a risk, and this time it didn't pay off. Danteh I don't think was terrible, but it's obvious that he was not the most comfortable in a Winston-centric meta. You can say whatever you want about the Glads regretting the Danteh drop and that they'd be better without him, blah blah blah, but you can't deny that it was very stressful on him to keep pace with these elite Winston players. And the Glads, for whatever reason, chose to only invest in the other positions on the team, which meant that there was nothing left over for poor Danteh. And sadly, he may have just not been the greatest fit for the Glads as well. Maybe on Houston it worked better because he was just a better scheme fit. And because of all the stuff that went on and not having enough investment in your tank, it has become a costly mistake. And one can't help but wonder if all of this could have been avoided if they had actually signed a better tank option and or a second one. The market was rather limited, sure, but a different choice in the early season may have completely changed their future. They lack comfort in so many different places, and tank has been the bane of their existence, which gets us into problem number 2. A lack of flexibility and a lack of comfort in the metagame. The combos they needed to run weren't something they could realistically play every single map. Glads were more in their elements when they could play Danteh on Ramatra, along with Yaki on Tracer, or maybe Kai on Cass or Sojourn. That's what made them look the best. You're looking at things that are oddly specific and just aren't going to work consistently, especially with how the metagame has been this year. And it only gets worse when they've tried to seriously cater to the less comfortable DPS and it becomes too much of a focus. When they move Kevster onto things like Mei and Sombra, it just makes it so your best carry can't do as much. Kev in his element with a good supporting cast has always been the recipe for success. You're leaving it up primarily to the less effective players to be the main guys, which only hurts your ceiling in the end. It's a vicious cycle that goes to show you that the Swedish god needs some help. And the sad thing is, not even the backline is safe. And they never were, mind you, even before the recent changes. Lastro has been a great player for the Glads, but he can't do everything by himself. When the man's your best flex support and simultaneously your best Brigitte in a Brig-centric meta, you really start to wish that cloning was actually a thing. While the support issues are definitely worse now than they were before, there was always this underlying issue with comfort. Every aspect of this team was not safe in some way, shape, or form. And as all these issues pile up and the frustrations have grown after missing Korea, the Glads felt like something needed to change. I'm not saying that things would be peachy and that they'd even be a better team if Danteh was still here. In fact, he'd probably tell you they'd be just as bad, if not worse. I don't really think it's fair to assume anything, but at the same time, it is clear that his leaving has set off a chain reaction of explosions, which gets us into problems 3 and 4. The current support and tank situations, the talk of the town. At the time, the idea of bringing in Marvel actually made a lot of sense. He's a super skilled player, he put in hella work on O2 Blast, and he was arguably the best available tank free agent on the market. He's a good Winston player, and he's reasonably good at Ramatra, so great. You get everything you need with him basically. He's just a more flexible version of Danteh with a way better Winston. Sadly, it hasn't worked out very well though, and now some people are kind of just calling Marvel garbage, and if you think that, I guess I can't stop you. But I think more than anything else, it's probably just a scheme fit issue. Marvel is not gelling well with this particular system and with his current set of teammates. They have not been on the same page in the slightest since the start of the summer stage. It's on the team as well as Marvel to communicate and adjust, and so far they haven't. It feels like there's a wall that currently separates the two sides. Also, it's never easy to go through a change like this at such a pivotal position this late into a season. Finding synergy with your tank player is already a challenge as it is, and doing so smack dab in the middle of the season with a guy the players really liked is even harder. And when you factor in Marvel's lack of experience with Western players while on high ping and on the other side of the world, it's a pretty tough challenge. This man's playing at a serious disadvantage, and he has no real chance to bond with his teammates in person and play with them in real time at a facility. Establishing that trust in this kind of situation is very delicate, it's super important, and it can easily go wrong. Problem 4 is the support situation. I'm not super familiar with the reasoning behind it, but Lastro has disappeared. Regardless of why events played out this way, the lack of his presence has sunk the Glads to an even worse position. Like I said before, he's been their second best player and arguably the only other consistent playmaker. At first, it seemed like Babel would potentially take the reins. He's not the greatest player in the world, but we know that he has potential, and maybe if he's starting full-time he could have figured it out. But then all of a sudden, now they sign Cal, and he starts both games last week. So now you have both of the flex supports that you initially signed this season missing in action. It just creates even more confusion. I mean no disrespect to Cal. He's not a bad player, and he's by no means at fault. It's just that throwing him in 3 weeks into a stage is very short notice. And unfortunately, he's no Lastro. For all we know, the Glads may not have had much of a choice, but nobody can deny the potential setbacks that you're facing from this. Now you're not just compensating for a new tank that you're struggling to adjust to, but now a new support player as well, and this one comes in without any real previous experience with the team. And now you have a lot of pressure on you. If this was earlier in the season and you were struggling then, maybe it's not much of a deal, but the recent losing streak paired with the home stretch on the way is a very different story. The fate of your season now relies on 4 games, 2 of which come after the break on a new patch with a new map type in a potentially new meta. The question is, are there any solutions? Can they fix this? Usually I'd have some kind of armchair theory or garbage analysis for these situations, but the Glads feel pretty stuck just knowing the circumstances. The changes they made have come very late, and all you can really hope to do at this point is embrace your identity. Let Kevster cook. Don't let him touch anything not named Tracer, Echo, or Sojourn. It's not worth your time. You need to embrace the only consistent lifeline this team has to offer. If you're gonna go down with the ship, it might as well be behind your leader. Give Kevster literally everything you have. Solution number 2 is gonna be to really try your best to slow down the game. I feel like part of the problem with LA is Marvel is way too aggressive, and they're maybe not used to giving their tank that many resources because of how Danteh played in comparison. They're used to giving it to Kevster and Lastro and their DPS. Hesitance can be really dangerous, but for the sake of building trust with Cal and Marvel, it might be for the best. If neither of these things are on the table though, then there's one other thing the Glads can try, I guess. It comes with risk, but maybe, just maybe, if you're Glads, you focus on your final week in late August instead of these upcoming games while you're in a mental funk. Maybe you think that practice is the answer and that it's better to perfect your craft in whatever comes next with this upcoming patch and new game mode and new hero and maybe new meta. Everybody's kind of starting from scratch there, which gives you more of a chance. Some teams really take advantage of these, while others simply collapse as they change to something they're not used to. Maybe Gladiators can hope that they're really good at this new patch, while their opponents, NYXL and Boston, struggle dearly. This approach, though, could be super luck-based, but, you know, even though it's really risky, luck may actually be their only hope. It's not like there's many options left for them this late into the year. There's not much time to improve, and you can't afford to make any other roster shakeups now. The road ahead for the Gladiators is daunting, to say the least. And for better or worse, the next month is going to show us exactly what they're made of. And if they're truly capable of greatness, they'll find a way to persevere. If not, we'll witness one of the craziest fall-offs in Overwatch League history. There's a lot of pressure on these guys, their mentals likely are not in the best state, and there's a serious uphill battle ahead of them. For positives, or for memes, the ensuing chaos will surely be spectacular. To all my friends that are repping the purple, I wish you nothing but the best of luck, because God knows you're really gonna need it.